We are pleased to welcome in two folks with different points of view. Joseph Grabowski, Communications Director for the National Organization for Marriage, and Shannon Minter, Legal Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Joseph, what is your take on what Senator Rand Paul had to say, that this issue should be decided on a state-by-state basis?
Well, I would say that Senator Paul is right in this case, that this is clearly the logic laid out in the decision by the Supreme Court in the case of Windsor, where they struck down part of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. In Justice Kennedy's majority opinion, he made clear that this has traditionally and historically been the purview of the states, and in fact that was part of the logic that allowed New York to redefine marriage to include the unions of same-sex couples. So this is something that we believe the Supreme Court will find to be the purview of the state, as it has indicated in the past, and that this debate should take place through the democratic process on a state-by-state basis, rather than being imposed in a one-size-fits-all solution from the federal courts.
Shannon, as you hear this, you may have a legal opinion of it, but politically, doesn't this amount to a huge concession by the pro-traditional marriage forces?
Yeah, it certainly does, and I think they're kind of seeing the writing on the wall that public sentiment in this country is shifting so rapidly toward accepting that same-sex couples and their children should be treated equally. But, also, this is one country, we have one constitution, and marriage isn't just a policy matter. It really is a fundamental freedom. It's a fundamental constitutional freedom that every American should be able to exercise. And I think that's why we're seeing so many courts all over the country, from Kentucky, Texas, Virginia, Ohio, Idaho, reaching that same conclusion, that there has to be one rule of law for all of us in this country, and that when a couple is married, their marriage should be respected wherever they may need to travel or move.
Monty Stewart of the Coalition for the Protection of Marriage defended the bans in both Idaho and Nevada, saying that allowing same-sex marriage sends a social message that fathers are not a valuable part of child rearing. Shannon, I'm wondering how you respond to such an argument.
I have never really understood that argument. It seems extremely kind of far-fetched and detached from logic or reality, which is what so many courts have held. I think the 10th Circuit recently said that it was wholly illogical to draw any such conclusion. Of course fathers are important, mothers are important, and there is nothing in the world about letting same-sex couples, particularly those who are raising children, have the same freedom to marry that other people have. If anything, that just underscores the importance of marriage to all of us, and it underscores that very important connection between marriage and parenting.
Joseph, many of us who call ourselves conservatives believe the Constitution is a document of limited and specified powers. Within the Constitution, is there a mandate for same-sex marriage?
I don't believe there is. As a matter of fact, the only time that the Supreme Court has considered that issue, they declined to even address a question in the case of Baker v. Nelson, because they said there was no substantive constitutional case to be made there, that the federal Constitution is in effect silent on the supposed right to same-sex marriage. And so I think to claim that the right to same-sex marriage as a federal constitutional issue is an erroneous reading of both precedent law and the Constitution itself.
Would you say it's time for the Supreme Court to settle this debate?
I do, yeah, and that would be one of the few places where we probably are in agreement on both sides of the issue. Both sides have petitioned for the Supreme Court to grant a writ of cert for the case in Utah, and increasingly it's becoming clear that this decision is going to have to come from the High Court in the land as to whether or not the states do have a right to pass and regulate marriage as the union of a man, as a man and a woman or not. And so we're hopeful that the Supreme Court will take that case because, again, we see strong indications from a proper reading of the Windsor decision, such a reading as we saw in the recent federal decision out of Louisiana, that the Supreme Court will rule in favor of states being able to regulate marriage in order to preserve what really it has been for all societies throughout time and across the world, even today.
Shannon, a few years ago, civil unions were on the seemed to be all the rage in terms of making a change in public policy for same-sex couples. Has the gay community moved past the notion of civil unions and now just embraces marriage as the standard of couple unity?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's true not just for the gay community, but for our country generally. Civil unions were a kind of halfway step in a number of states, and they certainly, I think, helped speed forward the pace of progress and allow people to get used to the idea of seeing same-sex couples having their relationships formally recognized. But at this stage of things, I think everyone recognizes that civil unions are a very poor substitute for marriage. You don't get any of the federal protections and benefits, but even I think more profoundly than that, there really just is no substitute for that fundamental freedom to marry. I mean, everyone knows what marriage means. It's the way that in our culture we join our lives with another person and express the depth and seriousness of a relationship, and you really can't create a substitute for that out of whole cloth.
And we will have to leave it right there. Shannon Minter in Utah, Joseph Grabowski in Washington, D.C. We thank you for your time, and America's Forum continues following this time out.